Thank you for being here, Congressman.
My pleasure.
The plan got a little undone this weekend. I had intended to start off by asking you about your time in Congress and the border and the budget.
Sure.
But I need to talk to you about Odessa, and before that, El Paso. We've had 2 mass casualty incidents over the last month involving automatic weapons in Texas. I want to ask you if it's time for us to have a different conversation than we've been having about guns.
Well, first of all, I'm a dad of a 10-year-old and 8-year-old son and daughter. My wife and I, like everybody else, see events like we saw unfold in Odessa yesterday. Sunday, today's Tuesday. Sunday, we went to church, and it was the first thing that was being discussed in our service. The pastor of the First Baptist Church in Odessa had one of the folks killed. Was from that church and was friends with our pastor and had called and asked for, obviously, support and prayers from our congregation in Austin. And so, it hits home when it's people and it's in your state and your neighborhoods. I'll go back in time just a little bit. A year and a half ago, when the bombs were going off around Austin, one of those bombs went off about a mile from our school, from our kids' school, and that has a dramatic impact on your thinking. On the substance of what you're asking about, yes, we have to continue to have and should have a conversation and think through what's happening in our society, that this is what we're seeing unfold. It's tragic, it's heartbreaking, and we need to continue to find ways to improve our systems so that we can make sure that people are safe and secure. It's one of the foundational and fundamental purposes of government.
Now, what does that look like, though?
Well, I'll say, you said just a second ago, though, you used the term, this is problem, but you said automatic weapons. It was not an automatic weapon, right? It was a semi-automatic weapon, and there's a distinction. And those distinctions do matter. But I think we've got to look at the heart of things. Look, I was a federal prosecutor, as you know, in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was employed under the Project Safe Neighborhoods program. A program which was developed and designed to have local law enforcement working with federal, hand in hand in a partnership, to target, specifically go after those who misuse firearms. So most of the convictions I was involved involved narcotics or guns when I was a prosecutor. We worked heavily to target felons in possession of weapons and use the full force of the federal statutes to be able to lock away folks who are misusing firearms. There was a lot of success in that program. There's a lot of data that indicates both Project Exile in Richmond, which was the sort of precursor to that in the 90s when there was massive violence in the city of Richmond, a town I used to live in, as well as Texas Exile, which was the kind of follow-up to Project Exile. And then that led to the formation of some of the federal Project Safe Neighborhoods programs, which did a lot to drive down gun crime. As we've seen, the number of homicides as a result of weapons has gone down on a per capita basis over the last 20-odd years. What we've seen, obviously, in the last several years has been discouraging with respect to the way weapons have been used. I think, and I've said this on a couple times on the campaign trail in the last several weeks, there are a lot of factors involved in all of this. There's the weapons question, right? And we can talk about that a little further. There's a cultural question. There's a question of, I went to Israel 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that struck me was landing, and the Democrats had been there for a week. Republicans landed Friday. We overlapped for a few days. Republicans were there for the next week. We all got together and went to Shabbat dinner with a number of the Jewish families in and around Jerusalem. They're heading into their Sabbath. And what struck me, and what struck my wife, she was there with me, was the extent to which there was a shutdown of the use of devices, iPhones, iPads, for a full day while celebrating the Sabbath. My wife and I have, since returning from that trip, have pledged to each other and are telling staff and friends and family, we're shutting down on Sundays. Whatever the news is, whatever's happening, we're getting off Twitter. I'm tired of sitting on the couch and looking at my iPhone, and my kids are looking at Karen and
So you think that's a cultural factor, one of the factors that contributes to the environment in which we're in?
I think there are I don't believe that there's one answer to any one of to this problem right now. I think there's a host of problems, okay? I think one of the problems is detachment. I think one of the problems is lone wolf individuals that are out there that are on these, I don't even know what that website, 8chan or whatever it is or was, that the guy in Plano was on, allegedly. But there's these, hateful locations online and so forth.
Right.
That when you are detached from humanity, when you're no longer sitting across the table and looking somebody in the eye, when you're no longer having to look at people as people, that is at least a part. We have to acknowledge as a society, given that there have been weapons in existence for a long time, including semi-automatic weapons such as AR-15s and other devices that have been in the market for decades. You have to acknowledge that there's a lot of forces coming together.
Sure. So I'll stipulate. I think other people would stipulate that there are a lot of factors here. But you can't legislate whether people are on 8chan. You can't legislate whether people have their devices at dinner. You can legislate access to weapons if you elect to, might not elect to. You can legislate access to high-capacity magazines. You can legislate background checks. So let's talk about what you could do, right? There was a poll this week Quinnipiac did of 1,400 registered voters. Many things in it I want to talk about, but one said Congress needs to do more to reduce gun violence. 72% said yes, including 50% of Republicans. So that question specifically on that subject, we're talking not about devices, we're talking not about cultural stuff, although again, let's accept the fact that that may be part of the conversation. Specifically on the question of guns, is there more that you or that we should be doing?
Well, let me challenge one assumption that you started with, and then I'll answer that question.
Sure.
You stated that we can't legislate, and you a litany of a handful of things. We could legislate and review things like 8chan. Now, that flies directly in the face of the First Amendment, potentially.
Correct.
We'd need to review that and look at it. But we time, place, and manner, fire in a crowded theater, those kinds of things. My point is, there are a lot of things we can look at. And then you have to stop and you have to go, okay, what's that going to do to impact your rights, right? LA Times wrote this last weekend in their, I think it was the editorial. It might have been an op-ed placed in the LA Times. I can't remember. It was over the weekend, outlining a lot of the data involved with mass shootings over the last several years. And it went through a number of things involving weapons. One of the things it focused on was the $75 million in free publicity that is direct, that somebody estimates is geared towards each one of these individuals who conducts one of these heinous crimes. A significant amount of focus on how it works, copycats. Then people see, whether you go back to Columbine and then see how people then follow that because there's just 24 hours end-to-end coverage of this stuff. So,
and I know there was some discussion this weekend about whether the guy's name should be released.
Correct.
And there was a delay in that. But again, please, Congressman, come back to guns.
We'll talk about the guns. But Evan, I'm trying to put in perspective. Because it all is going to lead back to the fundamental point, right? Which is, I am hesitant to push back on the First Amendment in that context, right? The people have a right to know, like, who's carrying out these crimes and what's going on behind it.
Right.
So now let's get to guns, right? So it's the same principle. I'm hesitant to want to interfere with what I believe is a fundamental right to defend yourself, defend your family, and be armed. My family, I've grown up around weapons my whole life. When I was a kid, walking down the creek with my 22 or my 20 gauge, and some of which were semi-automatic or not, depending on my age, at various times, and walking down with my gun to the next 3 farms over to go see my buddy. That's what we did. I was talking to a friend last night about this issue, and we had weapons in the back of our pickup trucks or cars, and the doors were wide open. It was just a different time, different society.
Right.
In our school parking lot, by the way, in the 1990s, 80s. I graduated in 90. The fact is, there's going to be a continued dialogue and conversation about this. Do I think that there's more that can be done? Sure. I think there's more that can be done to improve NICS. There's more that can be done to make sure that people aren't using straw purchases to get weapons, which happens all the time. We don't enforce it nearly enough. There's a whole lot of effort we could do on law enforcement side, which we're not doing, to stop ideological-based crime. We backed away from that over the last decade for a host of reasons we can get into. The FBI ought to do a better job of tracking down people that are in hate, related organizations online or groups that result in these supposed lone wolf guys like the Plano shooter. There's a significant amount on the law enforcement side and looking at the NICS system to be able to stop people that we can do. I am not one who wants to go down the road of having government pick and choose what is and what is not an acceptable weapon. And I hear people say all the time, it's, why do you need gun X or gun Y?
Well, what you hear and what you heard a lot this weekend was these kinds, whether they're automatic or semi-automatic, I understand there's a difference, that these are effectively weapons of war. And while we can protect gun rights and respect gun rights, why would the average person in the average situation need one of these guns? Again, I want to ask you specifically on that subject.
What is that weapon?
Say again?
But what do you mean by that, these guns?
I'm talking about the kinds of guns that been used, whether it was Plano, Allen, El Paso on the one hand, or Odessa, the kind of guns
what is
that
the
were
defining characteristic of the gun you're talking about?
That these are guns that the critics will say are not guns that an average individual outside of a combat circumstance would need access to.
But again, I genuinely mean this, right? So Beto says yesterday, very publicly, very emphatically, he said, let me be clear, we want to take all of the
mandated government
assault, of assault style weapons, I think is the phrasing he used. I still want to know what that means.
Right.
I still want to know from Beto. I want to know from others. Define that for me.
So let me turn it around.
Because
tell me whether there's any kind of weapon that the average person under the Second Amendment would have access to where you think maybe this is a weapon that the average person does not need access to.
Well, if you look at the use of weapons, just here in Texas, right? We had a fellow in Houston who was able to use one of these weapons that are being described as
weapons of
war,
right?
An AR-15 or whatever it might have been. I don't remember which one it was.
Right.
Was able to use it to fend off a home invasion, and had a significant number of people that were trying to get into his home and fend that off. And that was a use here legally by somebody who legally possessed it and was able to use it to defend him or herself. Right now, and I'll answer the question. Right now, 100 and X miles south of here, or at least certainly 100 miles south of the district I represent, there's a war underway between the Cartel del Noreste and the Reynosa faction of the Gulf Cartel, literally right across our border, which has increased spillover in terms of gang violence and other things that reaches into Texas. So then this gets back to the question: what is an American under the Second Amendment allowed to have in terms of a weapon to defend him or herself or her family or community? And when you get into the federal government saying that there's a specific limit to what it is, or the state government by that matter, get into what that specific weapon looks like, I have trouble getting into a specific definition as to what you can or can't have. At the end of the day, currently under federal law, as you know, dating back to 1939, when the Supreme Court upheld, I believe, in the 40s, by the time it got through and challenged, the restriction on fully automatic weapons. You can still get them, I think, in certain circumstances, but there's a general restriction ban today under fully automatic weapons. And so that's the current law. And I think that was sawed-off shotguns and other things that were part of that act. Then you go beyond that and you say now semi-automatic weapons. Semi-automatic weapons are in fact today the weapon of choice for most people who own weapons. And so a semi-automatic weapon includes a .45 or 9mm handgun. It includes rifles that people use for hunting. Now, sometimes those have smaller magazines and other things.
So your view, your view is
semi-automatic weapon. Define that. I'm not interested in restricting anybody's ability to have a semi-automatic weapon.
So let me ask you the same questions that were asked of people who were polled by Quinnipiac this week. Just so we're clear, we have you on the record. I think you're actually already on the record on this stuff, but let's just refresh. Let's just get you to say, this is where I am. Support for universal background checks was one of the questions asked. 93% of the people in this poll supported universal background checks. Are you for that?
Number one, that 93% number, though, is not reflective of understanding what the universal background check means in practice. Because when you do that, that number drops. I don't believe that you should. And what a universal background check would mean, let's peel that back. It would mean that an individual, if they were giving a weapon to their son or grandson or brother or sister or family member, wife, husband, doesn't matter. If you were transferring ownership of it, you'd have to have a background check on that individual. I don't believe you should do that. Now, if you have a private sale and private transaction, the vast majority of those are supposed to go through an FFL today.
Right.
And 80+% of those transactions do. The question is how to close that gap,
Right.
as we've had some.
You're talking
people
about private sales between strangers.
Correct.
Right.
And so
Which
if
I
you
know
have-
Lieutenant Governor Patrick yesterday on
has
Fox
said- yeah,
came
said
out
it
and
last
said he
night.
thought
Right.
that the NRA needs to get behind President Trump and they have to tighten up. We have to tighten up the background checks on private sales between strangers.
Right, and
you're with
I've,
him on
when
that.
I've been in favor of
Yeah.
figuring out how to continue to tighten down background checks between individuals who don't know each other. So
Right.
when you go to a gun show and if you're going to some table where people wink, wink, nod, nod, and say that's one where you can get around doing it rather than going to the FFL, I think we should fix that
Right.
and change, figure out ways to make sure that the process that we
Right.
currently
But
have for doing
between
that-
family members,
but
no.
Yeah, and you've got to be able to protect that and be able to, and it may be friends, people you know, but if you
Right.
have a weapon that you want to sell to a friend or a neighbor or somebody that you know and a family member, I believe you should.
So you think the way the
able
question,
and
the
ought to
reason
do
that the percentage is so high is because the question has not been asked in a detailed enough way.
Correct.
And you believe it
And
would
when
go
in
down.
polls, there are
Right.
plenty of polls that
Right.
show when you do that, then that number drops precipitously.
80% of people in this poll supported red flag laws. As you know, red flag laws came up as a topic of conversation after El Paso and Dayton. Interestingly, Governor DeWine of Ohio came out immediately after Dayton and said, we need to put red flag laws in effect. We've had kind of a conversation about red flag laws here, but it's been shut down pretty quickly. And where state leadership stands on red flag laws, I believe right now is not going to do it. You are opposed to red flag laws.
So let me be clear on it, though,
Yeah.
because I think this is important. My problem with when people just throw out the term red flag laws, my problem is due process combined with the Second Amendment, right? I don't think that it is right to be able to say that an individual can allege X and because of that go into a single judge, have the judge come and then take away a right protected in the Bill of Rights. Any more than I think they should be able to do that to shut down any entity, religious entity, a church or free speech, press or anything else. I don't think you should be able to go in and walk into court and be able to say, well, I think this news source is out of hand and they're doing X, Y, Z and they've been telling lies. Let's shut them down for a little while, make them come in and then have to defend why they're producing news properly. Or this church is crazy. They're putting out like crazy hate stuff. So let's shut that church down and make them come in and prove that they must do that. I don't think that you can go in and tell somebody that. That's my problem with red flag laws as they've been defined, described, and as I've seen them written in statute. Now, if you want to talk to me about what we need to do for looking at levels of commitment and how we commit individuals or not, I mean, in other words, if your next door neighbor is saying a bunch of crazy, hateful stuff, and you want to go in and say, look, man, I'm worried this guy's going to come in. Look, I got kids.
Yeah.
My neighbor's spouting off and saying, let's take race out of it. Let's just saying, I hate little leaguers, right? And I want to kill all little leaguers. And he's just spouting off. We say, whoa, dude. And we go take him into the government and say, we need to do something about this. And let's say we could get him committed under current law. Let's commit this individual. If that individual then comes out and says, you know what, I'd really like to be free again. I'll give up my weapons, but let me out. Am I going to feel really good about the guy next to me saying, I hate little leaguers? I'm saying that to just take out race or whatever. It could be anti-Semitic, it could be anti-Jewish, anti-Islamic or whatever. Am I going to feel good about my neighbor being able to drive his F-250 in the middle of a little league? I mean, talk to the woman in Charlottesville who got mowed down by a cop in Charlottesville in the downtown mall. Mowed down by a car. And I'm sitting there going, I had to sit there in a hearing and talk to the mother who lost her daughter by this hateful bigot who drove a car right into the downtown mall and mowed her down.
You understand the problem for a lot of people is that we have polling that shows that the public, whether they agree with you or not, you agree with them or not, is overwhelmingly for a lot of these things. Public feels frustrated that Congress is not taking action. Public sees that a background check bill passes the House, won't even be brought up for a vote in the Senate. If we're sitting here 6 months from now, is anything going to be different in 6 months from now than it is today?
I think that it will continue to be debated and discussed.
Do you understand the public's frustration at this?
Well, I do, but look, understand this.
Yeah.
The point of the government structure we have is not to move quickly. That's not the reason the structure was designed by the founders.
Well, you're succeeding at that.
Number two,
that.
right?
Yeah.
Well, that's a good thing on multiple levels.
Yeah.
Now, when you want to see change and see policy change, then you work it, right? Some of us want to see fiscal restraint. Well, good luck.
Well, look,
we can talk about that in a minute.
We're going to come to that, right?
But when have we seen fiscal restraint? When the American people, demand it. There is a rising concern about safety and security right now and how some individuals have misused weapons. We'll continue to have this discussion and find a way to do that and continue to balance a right to be able to defend yourself and your families and do that in a way that respects that right while continuing to secure the population.
Yeah.
And putting all these in context, it does matter. In the times in August here, right, while we've been talking about the tragedies and just horrific as they are in Odessa and El Paso, the same weekend, this last weekend, how many? I think there were 7 deaths and whatever in Chicago at the hands of maybe there were pistols, maybe they weren't. I don't even know the various types of weapons that were used or whatever's going on criminally. But we are seeing that kind of thing unfold in other places, which is why I got back and why I started to, and we'll close because I know you want to go to other topics, is I want to focus also on what else is happening, okay? We have this conversation about weapons, and we should, but let's also look at what else is going on, because we've had weapons in our society for a long time, and you're seeing a spike in a number of different areas in our country in different ways, and we need to address those and look at them. And I think fundamentally part of it is a detachment from humanity, from being able to look across the table for each other. I think that matters. Right. I think we should do more as a society to figure that out. Obviously focus on mental health, schools, security in the schools. I'm meeting with a company here in Austin that's got a whole new technology here in 30 minutes to talk about, or in an hour and a half or whatever, about technology that we can use to be able to have better safety in schools and so forth. And we need to continue to work on all fronts to secure society and protect our liberties at the same time.
I'd love to just spend all of our time talking about this, but I want to talk about other stuff. Today is the 3rd of September. It is 8 months to the day from when you were sworn in to Congress. Is
that right?
Has this experience in Congress lived up to or down to your expectations? Being in Congress.
Both.
A little bit of both. What's the experience in a nutshell? Critique it. Boilerplate it. What's it been like to be in there? Because honestly, from the outside, anything would be better than being in Congress, is what it appears.
I mean, there's an element. My son, yesterday, we were working on a treehouse on our property, and I said something about, I just made a really bad mistake. I was talking about a cut, and he goes, "You mean running for Congress?" And
he's on to you.
He's on to me. He is. Well, he might be.
Would you do this again, knowing what you know now for the 8 months? Would you do this again?
Sure.
I mean, you obviously are doing it again.
Sure, yeah.
But if you could go back in time.
Evan's trying to make news. I haven't formally announced, but
is there a chance you're not going to announce?
Well, we'll cross those bridges.
You're darn sure we will cross that bridge. You're going to have to delay your meeting with the tech people.
Look, my son was on something. He may be saturating some of the maybe occasional cynical comment that is made driving around talking to my wife and so forth. But look, it is an honor to be in Congress. It is an honor to be one of, I think, 17,000 or so in the history of our republic to represent the people in the people's house. I take it seriously. I take it seriously in meeting with those who agree with me and disagree with me both, and have been try to do that as much as possible. Look, as I said before, the system is designed not to be efficient and effective. That's a good thing on average. I think that you joked about it, but we've gotten to a place where we need to be able to break through on certain areas, okay? Whether there's some of these hot button issues like we're talking about already, or whether there's some of these sort of bigger structural things like spending, or whether it's something in the zip code of healthcare, border security, things that are fundamental, foundational, and I think not all that hard conceptually. You just need to figure out the willpower to do it. That side has been frustrating that we don't. Let me see if I can summarize my frustration. Unlike any of y'all's home budgets or businesses or nonprofits that you run, we never sit down and take our jacket off, roll up our sleeves, and sit down and get busy figuring out how to actually solve a problem. Now, some of us are trying to figure out how to break through that, but you go there, and I'm on 3 committees. You go to a committee, you go to the next committee hearing, then you go down to the floor for a vote, then you go out to some other event that you have to go to. Then you got to factor in, are you running, and then are you going to raise money? And I actually have spent very little time when I'm in D.C. doing much on the political side, probably to a bit of a fault.
So there's not a lot of big thinking. It's more just from one thing to another.
That's my problem, right? You don't sit in a room with Josh Baer and the guys here at Capital Factory and others and say, how do we solve a problem? So I've actually gone to those guys with a couple of problems I want to solve and say, well, what can we do to get more of that kind of thinking going, at least in parallel?
Is the problem Congress, or is it this Congress? One of the things I've thought about is the difference between you serving in this Congress as it happens in the minority versus the previous 2 years where, candidly, I don't think things got any more done or there was any more deep thinking in the previous 2 years than it is now. This seems more institutional in nature.
I think there's a little of that. I mean, I could make a partisan observation about some of the things that we've been pursuing this Congress that I disagree with, obviously, because since I'm not in the majority. But I'd rather not focus on that because I do think there's some institutional things we need to do. I would structurally like to change the way we approach spending, for example. I think all things drive through the spending question, right? Because essentially, that's for the most part how we make most of our policy in terms of how we affect things.
And this has been a big issue for you for your entire life in public service, right?
Yeah.
You've complained about spending and complained about deficits. The deficit is projected to hit $1 trillion in 2020, right? 27% in the first 10 months of this year over this point last year.
Yeah, so
right?
I mean,
these cannot be numbers that you're particularly happy to hear since you've been complaining about this stuff for
I mean, we're talking about racking up $100 million of debt per hour.
Per hour.
Per hour. 100 million with an M, $1 million of debt per hour. While we're sitting here right now in this conversation, $100 million, $2.4 billion today. And this is a bipartisan problem. And it frustrates the heck out of me. And in April, May, I got a letter. I drafted a letter. 45 of my colleagues sent a letter saying we should hold to the caps in terms of spending, which, by the way, would still keep you at close to $1 trillion levels of deficit spending. I was trying to stop where we're headed with the $320 billion cap increase that we just voted through in July. Now, I voted against it. 140 of my colleagues voted against it. The White House was not happy with my position on that. I don't believe that you just blindly follow wherever the direction of the leadership and the party is going if you disagree. And I think we need to have spending restraint.
And when you say it's bipartisan, Congressman, you mean that the Democrats in charge are partly to blame, your own party?
Correct.
Members of your own party are complicit?
Yeah.
And the White House is complicit because the White House has wanted to go along with
Now,
this increase.
If I'm going to defend the current spending cap raising deal, it would be because our military was getting really constrained. I went and spent the day with Fort Sam Houston. I met with the Army Futures Command here. Others that this district, is very important, military in this district, and across the entire nation, of course. We had a very bad situation with our military for a few years because the sequester kicked in, which, by the way, I supported. I mean, I supported automatic kick-in, cuts. The problem is they were disproportionately impacting defense, and that was constraining defense spending. Now, look, the good upside to that is they had to go squeeze blood out of turnip, right? They had to get every ounce they could out of it, which is good. That's a good exercise to go through. I think the entirety of the federal government needs to go through that. And they were hurting, and so I think there's a lot of effort by this administration to get that spending up. But I say this on the campaign trail, there's not a single veteran I've spoken to or active duty personnel who said to me, please balance the budget on the backs of the military. In other words, please mortgage the future of our children and grandchildren on our backs.
Then whose backs,
Congressman,
then whose backs would you balance it on?
You should balance the budget in a way that goes across the entirety of the country. I think you need across the board.
But exempts the military.
You should spend what you need to spend to defend the United States. You got to start with that premise as our core constitutional duty. So if I were doing this, I would say, what is our income? It's $3.6 trillion, give or take, right? You got to estimate. Call it $3.6 trillion and say, start with that, and then say how much to defend the United States of America. What is that number? Is it $675 billion, $705 billion, $730 billion? I honestly don't know.
So subtract that from the total.
Get that number. Now go over here. What do you have set aside for interest? By the way, interest on the debt is going to surpass defense spending by 2024. But let's take that number, spend the interest because you owe it, go over here, pay what you need to pay for people who are reliant on Medicare and Social Security because people's lives have been dependent on it. Now what's left? It ain't a hell of a lot. Now, you take what's left and you figure out what to do for non-defense discretionary.
And you got to stop doing some things.
And then you can have a conversation. And I've always said this as a conservative who believes generally in leaving more money in the pockets of American people to create wealth, create jobs and opportunity. Everything should be on the table at that point. And some of my Democrat colleagues, we've talked about this, freshmen, say, okay, under my theory, walk it through that way in a budget like you have to do running this entity or running your home budget. That's what you have to do. And then at some point you can now say, all right, well, we don't have enough money to do all the things we want to do. All right, what are you going to do to raise revenue? Well, raise taxes. Okay, well, let's have that conversation. Raise taxes on whom? What will that do from an economic standpoint? Right now we're at 2.7% economic growth after languishing in the 1 to 1.5 to 2% range off and on over the last roughly decade. We need, if you're going to get out of $22 trillion of debt spending, we've got to get 3% plus economic growth. We've got good job numbers, economy's moving in the right direction, but it's still a little bit, pulling levers to make sure that it stays strong.
I'm not surprised to hear that you're not for raising taxes. You were not in Congress in 2017 when the Trump tax cuts passed, so you were not there to vote on it. My assumption is that you would have voted for them since you're for making them permanent now.
I've publicly said that I supported getting our corporate tax structure in line with the rest of the world, which I think was important.
Right.
I think that we ought to have a wholesale restructuring of our tax system. And that would take revisiting the entirety of what the rate structure looks like and so forth. So, for example, if you want to make sure that we've got more money in the hands in the pockets of Americans broadly, do you, for example, change our Fica tax structure? Do you change the way how that impacts middle class families? Do you change how much you're allowing with respect to home mortgage deductions and charitable deductions and so forth? We've had child tax credits, all these different things we change. And then what does that mean about the upper bracket limits and so forth? Remember that when the income tax was put in place in 1917 or 16, whatever that was, it was done so as a small percentage on only the top X percent, right? And then that immediately grew very quickly and then grew to sort of cover everybody. And you look at FICA taxes. Right now, with respect to Medicare, we collect something in the zip code of about $180,000 over the lifetime of an individual, and we then pay out $350,000 in benefits. Medicare is like 2X upside down. What are we going to do about that, right? I mean, we've got to fundamentally address that. And look, Paul Ryan tried, and I had my strong disagreements with Paul Ryan on a number of things. Could have been stronger on border security and other stuff. But Paul Ryan tried, right, with premium support, and then the ads ran against him pushing Granny off the cliff. Because you're talking about maybe changing some age structures, allowing people to save money over here, have premium support for individuals,
I guess
and we've got to address the problem.
I guess I'm asking a slightly more simple question, which is if you're concerned, as I believe you are, because you have been for some time, about increase in deficits, if you're concerned about not having enough money for the military, and a lot of people believe that one of the byproducts of the Trump tax cuts was that it raised the deficit. Why make those tax cuts permanent if you're genuinely concerned about the increase in debt and deficits?
Two reasons. One, economic growth. You've got to have a competitive landscape.
Has the economic growth borne out?
I think economic growth has borne out. It has borne out at a softer clip than I would prefer, but it has borne out. We have more revenue today than we did last year. It's not like we lost revenue. We have higher revenue. The question really is, what are you doing about jobs and economic growth and development? Because if you want to get out of the level of debt that we have today, I would challenge any single Democratic member who's being critical of the tax cuts to posit to me and show to me how they're going to create economic growth. Okay? Demonstrate to me and show how you're going to get economic growth that was better than the last decade, which is a significant reason why
by undoing the tax cuts.
Yes, but propose to me, say, okay, fine. Increase that rate from 22, whatever the rate was reduced to, 22, increase it to 22 or 25. Okay. I mean, I'm open to any suggestions about how to change the levers of taxation so long as the goal is economic growth and so forth, which, by the way, is how you get the revenue in the long run by having a strong economy that's going to produce revenue over the next decade, 20 years. Because in 1946, we had the relative level of GDP to debt that we have today, right? Roughly 1-to-1, total GDP to total debt. The only way we're able to grow out of that after World War II, a one-time spending shot to save the world from fascism, today our debt is on the back of a social welfare state, is because we're able to grow the economy massively over several decades and get that debt down. We've allowed that to close back up, and now we've got a major problem.
So you will be on the should you decide to run again? You will be on the
in theory.
You will be on the campaign trail defending the tax cuts and calling for those tax cuts to be made permanent.
I think we should have permanence. We should have permanence of our tax rates so it's predictable. I am open to changing the tax structure, including moving rates up or down,
provided
so long as growth is the objective.
Right.
And so, do I want to have permanence in our tax structure? Absolutely.
Right.
And that includes corporate tax rate. That's include individual tax rates.
Right.
But if you want to have economic growth, you've got to have people out there producing wealth and opportunity for the American people.
Is this a good time to be running for office? Again, come back at the end here to your own big reveal on your plans. Maybe you won't actually tell me what you're planning to do. You know, we've seen Congressman Hurd, your colleague, retire. We've seen Congressman Olson retire. We've seen Congressman Conaway retire. Very different situations, very different districts. People are trying to lump those three together and say this is a trend, but really they're all different situations. Congressman Marchant. There are potentially a couple of other Republican members from Texas who are talked about as possible retirees before all this is over. What do you think is going on here?
I don't think that there's, I think people put too much stock in whether it's a good time to run, bad time to run. I mean, I'm not running, and I didn't run last year because I automatically want to worry about whether I'm reelected. I'm not running for reelection. I'm not running to be in Congress to then be reelected. I'm not running in Congress to be a committee chairman or to have some, special status. I'm running in Congress with agreement or disagreement in this room, and I see people here that I know from the campaign trail agree and disagree. Regardless of that, right? I'm here because I believe in the principles that make this country great from my perspective in terms of limited government, opportunity, freedom,
and whether it's
growth,
a good time to serve or not, or a good time to run or not.
Right. I didn't get through, cancer, chemotherapy, life's hurdles and whatnot in order to run for office because it's some sort of thing that I want to have on my resume. So to answer your question, those guys have all very different reasons. You said it. Will has got an enormous district. It's an exhausting district, and it's always a 51-49 type district. So it's really hard work, and he's been doing it for the 6 years he's been there. Pete Olson was a good friend. We worked together in Senator Cornyn's office, had some health curveballs. Mike Conaway's been there for, 16, 18 years.
Well, the Olson district is changing politically.
It's changing. It is.
Conaway couldn't get beat by a Democrat.
Correct.
That is a safe seat.
He just was at the point he'd already been the ag chair.
I guess the question is, are these guys reading the tea leaves in the next election cycle and seeing this is a bad time to be on the ballot, and if you're on the ballot and you happen to get back into Congress, it's going to be a bad time to serve for 2 years. Better to pull the ripcord then.
I don't see that. You'd have to ask them. For me, I don't view it through the lens of good time or bad time to serve. You should serve because you want to serve. And from my standpoint, I want to serve because I believe in this country. I believe in Texas. I believe that we have a great future ahead of us. We've got enormous opportunity in terms of technology development. It's a great time to be alive. It is. It's a great time for the future of our children if we just get our head on straight about how we structure and orchestrate government.
Last time the president was not on the ballot as a midterm election. He was on the ballot existentially, but he was not on the ballot actually. This time he will be on the ballot actually. Will you support him for re-election under every circumstance?
What do you mean by every circumstance?
Well, I mean, is there anything that he can? Is there anything that this president could do that would result in you not supporting him?
Of course, there's something that any human being could do that I wouldn't support the human being. But look, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the last however far we're into all of this, right? The economy is stronger than it was. The net growth, jobs heading in the right direction. I like the judges that have been added, the 2 to the Supreme Court, the circuit court nominees, the district court nominees.
Those are all on the positive side of the ledger.
Those are all very positive. Yeah. I believe very much that we're in a stronger place from a regulatory state. I believe we're in a stronger place militarily. I believe the defense is heading in the right direction. There's a cost to that, as we've already discussed, and we had to figure out how to deal with spending. But it is very important. I believe that our positioning with respect to having real, honest questions. I think the president is right to be raising questions about our positioning in Afghanistan and Syria and so forth. We're still there. I think we probably should still be there and have to think about, how we aren't or are not there. But I've also believe it's important to stand independently, right? So let's talk about independence, right? I have had separation from the White House on the spending front, as we've already talked about, separation when I voted against continued activity in Yemen, belief that we shouldn't engage in Iran under a 17-year-old AUMF, that we should only engage in direct, relationship to what that AUMF stood for, which is post 9/11, going after Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so forth. And I could go down a list of other things.
So you agree with them when you agree with them, but you're willing to disagree with them when
and I think that's very public. I mean, a lot of people don't see all the detail in the news and the D.C. press, but it was not missed by the administration that I voted to subpoena the information in oversight regarding those child separation issues, at the border. Why? I fundamentally believe, as you know, I'm very public about it, we should secure the border. And I believe we should do it, and we should hold families together until we've been able to process them so that there's not a message sent to the world that you can just bum rush our border. But you should do so the right way, and I had concerns about what was going on, and I wanted the information. And the administration, pre-Trump and post-Trump, is reticent and slow to give Congress information. It is one of my most frustrating realities of being in Congress.
Yeah.
That's true right now under Republican administration now. Trying to get information out of bureaucrats, regardless of ideology, is extremely frustrating. The People's House ought to be able to get that information. So I did that, and I voted that way because it's the right thing to do. I promise you, the phone calls that I got were not pleasant, but that's okay. It's my job. I'm supposed to represent Texas 21. And so looking into the next cycle, if we go forward as things are going right now, I'm going to support the president. I'm going to get behind this administration because we're heading in the right direction as a country. I believe that. There are a lot of things we need to do to improve it. Spending, border security, healthcare costs. We've got to deal with some of the continued problems that we've been talking. We opened this show with respect to the use of weapons in these events. We've got to deal with these things. But let's just think about the overall trend of the nation. I really do fundamentally believe right now we are heading in the right direction with respect to economic activity and growth and opportunity for the American people, having a strong national defense to defend ourselves around the world, a regulatory state, judges that respect the Constitution. Now, if we can get our hands around healthcare to get prices down as we should, if we can get a secure border to deal with the crisis that is good for our country and migrants who seek to come here, and if we can deal with some of the issues that we've talked about culturally and otherwise, I think we'll be heading in a very good spot.
Do you think heading into 2020 that we have reason to be concerned about the security of our election systems, given what we saw happened in 2016 and 2018?
Sure. I think, of course, we should, and we should be looking at that in great detail.
Why are we not talking more about it in Congress? Every time there's a discussion of election protections or voter security, it seems to get shut down. Why is that?
Well, I don't know that I accept that premise. I think that when there's a discussion about it, there isn't a very large discussion about it. But the question is, what do you do about it?
Hasn't the Senate repeatedly, hasn't Leader McConnell repeatedly shut down discussions of election protections coming out of the Russia situation from the last
No,
election?
what they've done is they've said that the politicization of it, making it about some sort of grand conspiracy with Russia that's been directed, I think, inappropriately, as a lot of has been borne out as the unfolding of the investigations and Comey and everything else has indicated, that making that a political statement is what they've been pushing back on. Finding ways to continue to improve our election systems continues to be a dialogue and a bipartisan conversation that's going on that.
Do you think Congress is doing enough to prevent Russia or other bad state actors from hacking into our election systems? I mean, this seems to be a persistent concern in both parties.
Sure.
That there is a weakness in our system and that there is a persistent threat coming. And yet I don't believe Congress has done very much to address that threat. So why not?
Well, you asked the question, do I think that Congress is doing enough? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't. And the reason I say that is I'm not on the committee of jurisdiction,
right,
and I have no control over what we're doing in the House.
I feel like you'd know, wouldn't you?
Well, but you can know whether or not we produce something that's like earth-shattering to go down that road. No, I haven't seen it. Bill hasn't come to me to say, "Hey, let's get this and solve this big problem."
Would you be for legislation that would try to tighten up the security of our election systems?
Sure. What does it look like? What does it do?
Devil's in the details, right?
Right. I mean, you've got to have a system that is, at every single point, right, our government is trying to find out how to stop outside bad actors from infiltrating our government. That is happening, right, every day, right now while we're sitting here. China's trying to hack our system. Russia's trying to hack our system all the time. That's been happening for decades. We figure out ways to try to stop that. You want to go back to paper ballots? You want to have good count? I mean, what is the process we want to go through to ensure the integrity of our elections? We need to have systems that we know we can trust and believe in because it's foundational. You've got to be able to believe that the people who are elected represent the will of the people. Absolutely, we should figure out how to do that. But this is raising literally hundreds or thousands of questions about national security. This goes right to the heart of issues that we have with some of our greatest competitors around the world, including allies, that people that are engaged in espionage and looking at all of our information all the time.
So why are you playing footsie with me on running again? You're running again, right? Just say it. I'm running.
I'm not playing footsie with you. You like
have you literally not decided whether you're running again, or are you just hiding the ball here?
You like to make news. You're in the job of making news.
Make news.
I will make my intentions known at the right time, in the right place. Look, I enjoy doing what I'm doing. I do miss being around my 10-year-old and 8-year-old children and my beautiful wife. It is you got to get on the plane and fly up every Monday, fly back on Friday.
You are considering not running, Congressman?
I will make my intentions known
No.
shortly.
You're either running or you're not. And so if you haven't decided, say I haven't decided. Are you up in the air about running, or are you just not telling us?
Time will tell, Evan.
This is the worst cliffhanger ever. Come on.
I know.
You're not going to say, all right, I'm going to look backwards rather than forwards and try to bring this to a close and bring the audience in. I believe Lamar Smith won in 2016 against the Democrat by 21 points. In the previous election, no Democrat even bothered to run. Mm-hmm. Your race was fewer than 3 points. It was basically where the O'Rourke-Cruz race was. It was a little bit more than 2.5 points. Have you reflected on what happened in that race? Why your race was so close versus what that district typically did? I realize there were a lot of close races last time.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you've thought about that district in particular. That was, other than the Hurd congressional race, that was the closest of the congressional races. Well, it was. It was super close last time. Was it you? Was it Joseph Kopser? Was it demographic changes in the district? Was it Trump? Was it Beto? Was it some combination of those things? I'm trying to understand what would be different in 2020 if you do decide to run than was the case in 2018. What happened?
This is one of those questions that, you asked the question, have I thought about it? I think was the question, and then you asked what happened. Of course, we've thought about it, right? You wouldn't be worth your salt if you didn't think through all of the mechanics going to election. But then the answer also is no, I haven't really thought a lot about it, right? In other words, I don't dwell on it. People tend to worry about those things.
I think it's less about worry than understanding what happened last time to avoid what happens again this time. Right?
Yeah, but whatever's going to happen is going to happen. Look, I view my service through the lens of I put myself out there to run, to represent this district. I clearly have a lot of people in this district that my ideals and ideas and values and ideology align very closely with, and some that do not.
Yeah.
I still believe that what I believe is good for everybody, or I wouldn't do it, I wouldn't believe it. I recognize that there's a chunk of Austin that is extremely left-leaning, right? There's no, that's obvious,
yeah, that's
right?
not exactly headlines.
I used to live on South Congress Avenue during law school, like go down to Tony Price and the Continental Club, and I live right down there. There's often I was pretty sure I was the only Republican in a 1-mile radius, right? When I'd be down there. It is what it is. That's okay. I love Austin. I love the live music scene here. I love what the city offers in that regard, and others. But my life doesn't rise or fall on this. And I'm not trying to be evasive of the point. I'm just saying this is not what I wake up every day worried about. Now, to analyze it, I think there's some degree of irrational exuberance about the nature of the election from 2 years, 8 months ago, 10 months ago, about, these like fundamental changes in Texas. Well, I mean, talk to the people that I see moving here from other states who come to me and thank me and others for standing strong as a conservative because they're seeking refuge from other states. I mean, some Californians or others that move here saying, golly, things are just nuts, just really a breath of fresh air to be here.
Do you think 2020, if 2018 was maybe an outlier, a unicorn election, you think 2020 goes back to being a more normal?
I don't know how to characterize normal. You run and then there's a number of people and they vote. If you ask me what 21 looks like, I would tell you that it is not as tight as they would say from last year. I would also say that it's not that a election from 2016 with a 20-point margin reflected an actual race between two candidates with the full force of both parties behind it. There's no questioning that Nancy Pelosi and the DCCC and others, they have 8 staff time, full time here in Austin, Texas, 8 right. To try to flip 21, to try to flip Roger Williams' seat, Michael McCall's seat, and others. And that's the reality of what's happening, right? There's a full court press. Nancy Pelosi's going to be down here at Trib Fest and, spending time here in Central Texas. Well, so be it. If they want to come down here and put a big pile of money on Congress Avenue and light it on fire, then bring it on.
You worry about big turnout in the next election cycle. You had almost presidential level turnout in the last midterm, 8.3 million. I mean, you could have 10 million, 11 million in this next presidential based on the turnout in the last presidential. Does larger turnout necessarily equate to bad for you or for other incumbents?
Again, I don't think it through that lens. Large turnout, great. The more people vote, the better.
So you are for larger turnout?
I don't care. Yeah. I really genuinely don't care.
Yeah.
I want people to be able to show up, vote, and make a decision. And then whatever happens, happens. And if the people of Texas 21 decide to go a different path, then I'll get to hang out in Texas with my wife and children. If they decide that they believe that pro-growth, limited government, freedom, opportunity, all the things that I think I stand for,
then they'll send you back to D.C.
They'll send me back, and that's great. And I'll go fight for them for 2 more years.
So you know, Wendy Davis will be here next week. We're going to talk to her about her Democratic race. It's a contested primary. She hopes to be the candidate against you. What's the one question you'd ask her if you were in my seat next week? As you think about the framing of this potential November race next year.
You know, Evan, that's all on you. I don't look. I don't say that.
I'll have a lot of questions. TBH.
I'm sure you will.
You know,
I'm sure. Look,
right, yeah.
I don't. I'm not worried about it. You know, I've reached out to Wendy, and hopefully we'll get together and have coffee. I don't care. Joseph and we talk regularly. He and I disagree, but he's got some good ideas on different things. I don't view it through that lens. I will run a hard race. I will call it as I see it. I've got strong disagreements with former Senator Davis, and I will make those known.
Yeah.
Assuming I run.
If
I run, I will make those known. And but look, I do think it's important for people across the country. Like, just stop living our lives rising and falling on what the president tweets or what is said on Meet the Press on Sunday morning. For the love of everything holy, like, if you disagree with me, great. Disagree with me, it's fine. If you think that the corporate tax rates are bad, or if you think that we ought to do something different on spending, if you want to come talk to me, guns, I meet with moms, demand action, all of these things, great. Fired up. I'm going to go vote the way I think is appropriate under the Constitution, under what my view of government is, and then the people will decide, and that's fine. It's
whatever
good.
the outcome,
whatever they
is,
decide, they decide. I
with.
believe I'm doing what I said I would do when I ran. I stood up to stand up for limited government, a strong border, healthcare system that actually gets prices down. And we haven't talked about health or border security, by the way. And getting spending under control, strong military with a clear mission, and then get Washington out of the way. That's what I believe. That's what I will fight for, and I will do it as hard as I can.
Let's take some questions for the balance of our time. Sir in the back. Go ahead.
Thank you. The 2017 corporate tax cut was sold under the premise that it would help give a big boost to the economy. To my knowledge, there is nothing in it that requires companies to actually invest the money here in the United States. They can invest it as they see fit for the business, whether it's in India or China or Singapore or wherever. If the tax cut is made permanent, should companies that benefit from it be required to actually invest the money here in the U.S.?
Well, that's a good question. I like questions like that, even if I'm not 100% sure. I haven't thought through that fully. What you're talking about as a possibility is like adding a layer of requirement on top of the tax cuts. My initial reaction would be, I don't like government getting into the business of telling the corporations or individuals how they should spend their money in what particular way. I think you should try to free things up and get it to where they've got the opportunity to do that. And then you've got to rattle, as we're currently doing right now, for better or worse, depending on your perspective, with respect to trade agreements and what you do to try to reset conversations so you have a strong manufacturing base in the United States. You know, some of the debate right now with the USMCA, with the trade agreement with Mexico, is to reset the standards in Mexico with respect to labor and minimum wages and so forth, to try to set the balance so that we can have more incentive for manufacturing here, but continue to have free trade with Mexico. That's a part of the whole USMCA debate. I think that we ought to have those kinds of conversations to make sure that we've got a strong, robust economy here, and protect manufacturing jobs in the United States. Those are important. But we also ought to have robust free trade. We ought to have a situation where businesses can do what's in their best interest and figure out how to make revenue that's good for them and their shareholders, and wealth creation and job creation, because those things spill over. So if you've got manufacturing going on in China, if you've got, whether it's parts and products of the for our iPhones and so forth, there's still massive job creation in the United States because of what we do on our side of the ocean in terms of the all of the entrepreneurial activities that spawn from that, all the app development, all of the sales and servicing, and all of the stuff that we do here. So it's a matter of figuring out.
So you're not inclined to
marginal
mandate
utility.
that money be invested here?
No, I mean, I'm open to having those conversations as always. Like, if I always look at a policy, I'll usually look at it like fresh and say, okay, is this a good policy? But I probably wouldn't go down that road.
You mentioned the USMCA quickly. Is that going to? Are we going to have that pass Congress before the end of the year?
I really think it boils down to whether the speaker is more concerned about giving a perceived victory to the president and getting something like that done, or whether she's getting enough pressure from labor who want the deal because of that resetting of the Mexican standards. Again, for better or worse. You can make arguments both ways, but the USMCA contemplates, right, raising the standards in Mexico, raising minimum wages, changing some of the labor laws to sort of level the playing field, both for their benefit, but also to increase manufacturing here. She's getting some pressure from labor to support that. Those are the main changes to the NAFTA agreement. NAFTA remains in place. Short answer, I don't. My bet would be no.
Probably not.
For the political realities. Right. But who knows? It
Would
depends on
you
the
be a
pressure.
vote for it if it comes up?
As it's currently drafted, as I understand it, yes.
Yes, sir.
Mike's coming.
Sorry.
Yep.
Sorry.
I mean, I can hear you, but I want everybody else.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I'm one of your constituents. I'm a left-on conservative gun owner, and I'd like to go back to the ERPO issue. And I appreciate your perspective on preserving Second Amendment rights. But, you know, in my experience, I've met people who at different times in their lives are not safe to be around when they're handling a gun. And suicide by gun affects rural communities. It affects military families at a higher rate, and domestic violence death by gun. Those happen and affect many, many more families than mass shootings. And I'd like to ask you if you think it's possible, given your experience in policy authoring and in prosecution, would it be possible to write a law, craft a policy, craft a law that that allows a court to temporarily take away somebody who is not safe at that time? And I'd like to also point out that statistics show that most people who attempt suicide, even if they attempt it by whatever means, they don't make a second attempt if they get help.
Right. Well, good question. There's a lot packed into that we're running out on time. I'll try to give the 1 minute answer, which is really difficult. Happy to pull aside afterwards to talk a little longer about it. Number one, proud to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. One of the things we focused on a lot right now is suicide prevention for our veterans. I've got great concerns, I've said publicly, about 1% of our population is carrying the burden for the rest of us in defending the nation. They're on their 6th, 7th, 8th tours. You've got husbands and wives that are often married together in those families. The burdens that are being placed on our men and women in uniform, to me, are too much, what we've been asking, and so those strains are shining through, and PTSD and other things, and we know it's a problem. So Veterans Affairs Committee, we're working on that separately. To the extent you're talking about with respect to guns and suicides, obviously suicides is a huge problem. You asked the question whether there'd be some way under current law, right, under 922D, if you are under a temporary restraining order for an intimate partner, you're not allowed to have weapons. There are other caveats in there with respect to mental health. If you're committed and so forth, you're not allowed to have weapons. And the question becomes if there's other avenues to do it. I don't know the answer to your question. You said, would it be legally possible, or you said something like that? Yep. You've got several Supreme Court precedents regarding mental health issues over the last 20 or 30 years, which has actually made it very difficult to find ways to go in and have voluntary, or go in and have a 3-day quick possibility to have somebody put in and have commitment to say, hey, dude, you need to chill, what are you doing? And then check that situation out. So you're running into some Supreme Court precedent problems to figure out what we can do on that mental health front. We should continue to have this conversation and find ways to do that, particularly, I think, for our veterans. Obviously, we've had some both high profile and then those that are never heard of, people that have lost their lives as a result of veterans who are facing those kinds of situations, and not just veterans. You were talking about broadly, but you highlighted veterans. Let's talk more after.
Let me take one. Can we take one more? Okay. Let's go right here, right in the front.
Congressman, thank you so much for being here. You're on the record as saying that there's a lot of hysteria about climate change, and that you think the value of the clean and affordable energy, or the dirty and affordable energy that we currently have, outweighs any of the legislative changes that we need to make. At what point would your thinking change, and does the climate debt that you're putting on the future of your 8 and 10-year-old come into play at all in your thinking about climate change?
Appreciate the question. Thanks for being here.
It's an easy one at the end.
Yeah, which again, knock that one out in a minute. Look, my view on this is one, I know no one in corporate world, non-corporate world, hunters, fishermen, people in Texas, whatever, who want dirty air, dirty water. If you overlay maps in the world of your freest economies with the level of cleanliness of the air, there's almost a direct one-to-one relationship. We ought to continue to improve that around the world. If you look at what we're producing in the United States in terms of product of poisons put in the air and so forth, we've never been cleaner in terms of what we're putting out. There's a lot of questions about CO2, right? And that's one of the underlying questions. Right now, CO2 levels in the United States have been being driven down largely on the back of fracking and natural gas. Also, Republican, Rick Perry, evil Republican, embracing an all-of-the-above approach where we now have roughly 20% of the grid is wind. There are side effects to that, though. We had problems this summer, right, where we were pushing up the boundaries because we didn't have constant level fossil fuel produced energy where wind was producing it. And we got some places where we had some stress on the grid this summer. We've got to pay attention to those issues. But here's one thing that I've raised often for those that, as I assume you, have concerns about levels of CO2, right? And believing that there's going to be some catastrophic events from that in 8, 10, 15, 20 years. And to my colleague from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, who said, well, it's all going to come crashing down in 10 years. And my question has often been, in every hearing I've been a part of, whether it's budget or oversight, is, okay, if that's your threshold, if that's what you believe, do you or do you not embrace nuclear power, right? Because if you believe that CO2 production is going to be cataclysmic, then you would immediately embrace nuclear power in order to have non-emission energy, to have the energy we need, because we all recognize that life is massively better in our world, around the world, with clean, abundant energy. We go to hospitals here that are fully powered up at Dell Children's or Seton or wherever it is. Hospitals in Uganda are not, right? You've got doctors there and nurses that are there that are pushing bags to keep babies alive. You've got people whose lives are not the standard of living and the life expectancy that we have. We are driving up life expectancy around the world where we're able to get clean, abundant energy around the world. You want to make the world a whole lot better place? Get China to embrace our current structure and policies. Get China to take liquefied natural gas from the United States and have clean burning natural gas. Get India to do the same. And you'll have massively reduced CO2 if that is your aim. My aim is quality of life, clean, abundant energy, find ways to do that. And I think that's the direction that we ought to go.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good to have you back
Enjoy
here.
it as always.
Congressman Roy
Appreciate
a hand.
it.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Evan.
Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Good. See you again.